The NBA trade deadline about a month away. There are plenty of rumors out there, but where there's smoke, there's usually fire, and Kyle Lowry's name is definitely burning up. We break down the reasons for a potential Lowry trade, a deal for D'Angelo Russell, and other trade targets on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. All right, David, we've got some trade rumors to get to here, specifically this one about D'Angelo Russell, all right? It's been floated about enough now where I think we need to take it seriously. This idea that the Heat could trade Kyle Lowry for D'Angelo Russell. Now, there's been reporting around this for about a month now. And usually, you know me, I'm pretty cynical and dismissive about just trade ideas this specific and this big, involving like important players, a core player like Kyle Lowry is, and things like that. And you and I have talked off air about this quite a bit, but it's getting enough momentum now where I'm taking it seriously. And there's two reasons why. First reason is, well, first time, Brian Windhorst mentioned it on his podcast, the specific idea of trading Kyle Lowry for D'Angelo Russell. Now, Windhorst didn't say, I've got reporting on this, that the Heat and the Timberwolves have been talking about it, but Brian Windhorst doesn't just throw stuff out there for no reason. He's as plugged in as anybody in NBA media in terms of what front offices are talking about. Look no further than the Utah Jazz thing that went viral over the summer right before they traded Rudy Gobert to the Timberwolves. So he is as plugged in as anybody, okay? So for him to just mention Kyle Lowry for D'Angelo Russell, I don't believe it to just sort of be this flippant, hey, let's just throw some trade machine ideas together on a podcast, okay? So I think that there's some intel behind that. I'm guessing, but it's an educated guess. We're also hearing it from Jeff Zillgitt from USA Today, been around for a very, very long time, reporting that the Heat are open to trading Kyle Lowry and may even want to shed his salary. So when you look at a D'Angelo Russell deal, the fact that D'Angelo Russell's on an expiring contract makes a lot of sense. We've got Shams Charania on Monday morning reporting that Minnesota is looking to basically upgrade that D'Angelo Russell spot, swapping D'Lo for an upgrade at point guard. So all of this stuff sort of boils down to, yeah, I believe the reporting. The second reason is that it might be Miami's best way to actually improve this roster that's hovered around 500 all season long. And I don't believe that the Miami Heat believe that this is a championship contending roster. And so if that's the case, then you start looking at ways to improve it. And okay, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Herro, all untouchable right now. Okay, Tyler Herro can't really be traded because of the poison pill contract. Bam Adebayo is a core piece, as is Jimmy Butler. Kyle Lowry is making $28.3 million this year, with another year left on the contract after this one. So when you talk about chunky salaries, he's the biggest salary in terms of the top players that the Heat can realistically move to get a chunky salary back in terms of salary matching. He's played 36 games this year. He's averaging 13.1 points per game on 39.8% shooting, 33.6% on threes, underwhelming numbers across the board. It's his lowest usage percentage since he played for the Houston Rockets, okay? And so when you start looking at ways for the Heat to improve it, if those three other guys are untouchable, Duncan Robinson, like, he's a chunky salary, but you're not getting a good player back if you're looking to upgrade the roster. You could maybe shed Duncan Robinson's salary, but that you're attaching then probably a first-round pick with that. You're not bringing an upgraded player back probably in any sort of Duncan Robinson deal. And then you go beyond that, and you've got little tiny salaries that they can work with, and we'll touch on that stuff later. And we will touch on the D'Angelo Russell fit in Miami here in a second. But David, based on all of these things, are you believing the smoke around the Kyle Lowry trade rumors?
I think there's certainly a possibility that they're exploring the trade. I'm not sure, and I've talked about this before. I feel like there has to be a level of buy-in from Jimmy Butler. Now, that's not necessarily a guarantee, but I think you've committed to Jimmy as your core player alongside Bam and Tyler Herro for the next few years. And given what we've seen from Jimmy in the past in terms of being disgruntled in certain workplaces and things of that sort, I don't think you acquire Kyle Lowry and then trade a player that is as close to Butler as Lowry is without that kind of approval. So I think there's certainly that to consider. I imagine he's either said, look, you've got to do what you've got to do. I understand it. Kyle will be happy with whatever deal you make or something along those lines. I can only assume that something like that's happened. However, the problem with all these rumors regarding Lowry is that we've never seen any potential Miami Heat move being so highly publicized before it takes place. Almost any move that you can look back to over the Pat Riley era has been in the shadows. Something that just comes from out of nowhere, whether it's acquiring Goran Dragic, whether it's acquiring Dwayne Wade, even the big three. Yes, they were certainly in the recruitment process, but which team wasn't?
Even last year, trading KZ Okpala via press release was the announcement when you've got, and I know KZ Okpala is not a big name, but in an NBA media landscape where Shams and Woj are constantly racing to break news, regardless of the name in the report, the fact that Miami Heat are still the only organization in all of sports, it seems like, that can execute a deal and then announce it via press release and break the news via press release, it is pretty wild. So I understand your point there. Can I make a counterpoint to why the Kyle Lowry stuff might be out there and why the Heat might be purposely leaking it?
I could see. I mean, trying to light a fire under him.
I don't even know lighting a fire under him. I don't think that they feel like Kyle Lowry needs some sort of fire lit. I just think that he's a 36-year-old point guard, and this is what happens to 36-year-old point guards. I don't think that Kyle Lowry is not producing at the level that the Heat want him to produce at because some sort of lack of fire under his behind. I don't really think that that's the case. I could be wrong, but I just look at this as an older point guard, okay? That's sort of been shoved off to the side in an offense that doesn't really need him anymore. This is not the offense that Kyle Lowry joined 2 summers ago that was basically going to run through him. And, you know, him running pick and roll with Bam Adebayo and getting Jimmy Butler easier looks so that Jimmy didn't have to work so hard. All that stuff is happening now, but it's happening with Tyler Herro sort of running the point guard spot. It's happening with Jimmy Butler taking on more playmaking. It's happening with Bam Adebayo having more offense run through him than ever. I mean, how many times have we seen the numbers where Bam's isolation stuff is just even higher? Just throw the ball to Bam at the nail, and he'll go get you a bucket. You don't need to run that much offense anymore for him to get him easy looks. Kyle Lowry just doesn't seem as important as he once did to this Miami Heat offense. And so what happens? You pivot, right? As an organization, you pivot. And I think it's not that Kyle Lowry isn't a good basketball player. It's that if you're able to reallocate the resources, aka the money that you're paying him, to something else that you need a little bit more of, that's why I think that these reports are out there. I think the reports are out there is because Miami's sort of canvassing the league. And as private as Miami wants to be about negotiations, usually, I guess they've been pretty direct in the past saying, hey, this is the team that could take on KZ Okpala. Hey, we want Dwayne Wade back. Please give us Dwayne Wade. We're not just looking for any shooting guard to come off the bench. We're looking to bring back D Wade. So the negotiations happen more in a vacuum, where in this instance, you can't control what other front offices are reporting and telling NBA media people if you're the Miami Heat. And so if the stuff is out there, I got to imagine maybe they're canvassing the league. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're being really aggressive, but I do think it means that Kyle Lowry's on the trade block. The other part of it too is this could be a signal by Miami's front office saying, hey, by the way, Kyle Lowry's on the trade block. If you want him, come get him.
The counter to that, and that's that there's just a lot of media people who are assuming that Lowry is no longer part of Miami's long-term future or even short-term future. Yeah. That the idea is, well, look, this is a minimalized player who's aging. He's 2 months away from turning 37. He's no longer as effective as he once was. He's the most likely option. Kind of to the same point that you were making earlier. If you're looking to trade away a big salary, is the biggest salary that you could probably trade.
But that's why some of this stuff has been out there by some other NBA media people and we haven't really talked a whole lot about it. The reason I wanted to talk about it and why I'm taking it seriously is when you have a guy like Brian Windhorst talking about it like that. And by the way, Bill Simmons floated the idea, and we sort of debated it on a show earlier. Bill Simmons doesn't get enough credit. He's not a newsbreaker by any stretch, but he knows NBA people. Like he's sort of similar in the way that he's not just throwing names at the wall all the time and just to see what sticks for random trade ideas.
Look at Doncic. He's talking about it.
Right? In 5 years, maybe. So there's enough people now who I trust, who I know people and know what's being talked about in the NBA, talking about it, where we have to give it some credibility. And so if Kyle Lowry is on the trade block, what is it that the Miami Heat would want back? I think obviously D'Angelo Russell does make a little bit sense when you look at the salaries, you look at what Minnesota is looking for, and if you're the Miami Heat if you're playing with a trade machine and you're just looking for a place that makes sense to put Kyle Lowry, Minnesota, for some reasons, does make sense. There's other trades that we want to get to here in a bit also, but we're going to first tackle the D'Angelo Russell topic in the next segment. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. If your New Year's goals are to manage your budget better and to save money, well, you need Rocket Money. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about, like a newspaper subscription or maybe a website that you don't no longer go to, maybe even a streaming service that you forgot you even downloaded when they were having one of those couple month trials or something along those lines. Look, it just happened to me. I signed up for Amazon Prime over the holidays. I don't really need Amazon Prime. My wife already has it. Thanks to Rocket Money, I got that canceled right away. Look, it saves you tons of money. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, and it saves the average person up to $720 a year. So stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. That's rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. We got some trade ideas involving the Clippers, the Lakers, and the Utah Jazz coming up here in a minute. But let's talk D'Angelo Russell first. The reason why he makes sense, at least in terms of trade machinery right now. Kyle Lowry, I already said, $28.3 million this year. D'Angelo Russell's close to that, making around $30 million from Minnesota. It's pretty clear what's going on with the Timberwolves. They want to run a lot more stuff between Anthony Edwards and either Karl Anthony Towns when he's healthy and Rudy Gobert. D'Angelo Russell, sort of similar to Kyle Lowry, being cast to the side in that offense, not really being used the way that he probably ought to be used in order to maximize his own abilities, right? Sure. And so if you look at from Minnesota's perspective, they could use a leader, obviously. Kyle Lowry is that. You and I have debated before whether or not he'd even want to be a leader in Minnesota, but that's not really Miami's problem if they're able to get a deal done and they're motivated to do so. But in terms of D'Angelo Russell's fit in Miami, he's scoring 17.1 points per game on 46% shooting, 36.5% on threes, all way better marks than what Kyle Lowry's doing this year. 6.2 assists per game. He's 26 years old, going on 27 years old. He'll be 27 by the end of the regular season. He's in the final year of his contract of that $30 million, so you'd have to throw another salary in there, or else you'd be going over the luxury tax if you're Miami, and as we know, they don't really want to do that, and if they were going to do it, it wouldn't be for a player like D'Angelo Russell coming back. But it gives you the financial flexibility at least to say, you know what, let's get D'Lo for a few months in here. Maybe we can add some scoring punch into our worst 6 in the league ranked offense. We can get D'Lo in here, get some points, move him around, figure this out, and then we can let him walk. We can walk away from him in the offseason, not bring him back, and we have a little bit more financial flexibility. Or if it works out, maybe we can re-sign him to a more of a team-friendly deal. That would be, I think, the thinking from Miami. What do you think about D'Angelo Russell's fit potentially in Miami?
Well, the idea is, I think, that they'd probably bring him in as a bench player, although that's something that Russell probably wouldn't be too happy about. I think it would, for him, it would feel like more of a lateral move, right? Like you're coming off the bench in Minnesota, you'd be coming off the bench in Miami. I can't see him as a plug and play type player, which is
plug and play into the starting lineup, you mean?
Right. Yeah.
I agree with you, by the way.
I have concerns there because, you look, I know that Lowry is a net negative at this point, and he's struggling in terms of his shooting, and he's not being utilized the way that he probably idealized when he first signed with Miami. And it's all fine and good, but the reality is also you don't want to just trade him off for another player who's going to either hijack the offense and try to take it over to the way that D'Angelo Russell is capable of, and that's
not just capable of,
utilized.
Does a lot. Yeah, that's what he does.
He is a confident player, and he wants the ball in his hands, and he will take shots that he probably should not take on more than one occasion throughout the course of a game.
Yes.
That's not Miami's style of play. That's not Miami's offense. You've got a hierarchy here, and D'Angelo Russell just doesn't fit at the top of that.
Well, can I ask you a question then? Because you mentioned something interesting. So, and I do agree with you. If you acquire D'Angelo Russell, I think you bring him off the bench. And And by the way, I know he's making $30 million this year. I think for D'Angelo Russell to sort of maximize the rest of his career, it's going to look similar to what Jordan Clarkson has done, right? And I know Clarkson's starting right now for Utah, but that's all weird and stuff. But ultimately, I think D'Angelo Russell would just be like an awesome microwave scorer, sixth man off the bench. I think he could have a really successful career doing that. Mm-hmm. To your point, does D'Lo think that? Probably not. I mean, he's going to have to eat a whole big heaping slice of humble pie in order for himself to get there. But maybe that'll happen. Maybe it'll happen as soon as this offseason when those $30 million contract offers aren't out there, because they won't be. So who knows? But to your point, if D'Lo's coming off the bench and you're trading Kyle Lowry, then who fills in is now the new fifth starter, right? Because you're going to have Tyler Herro, Jimmy Butler, Caleb Martin, I would imagine, and Bam Adebayo. Do you elevate then Victor Oladipo to the starting lineup? Because I think a lot of people would say, well, trade Kyle Lowry, and then you elevate Gabe Vincent on the heels of, two really big Gabe Vincent games against the Milwaukee Bucks last week. I have long said, don't be so sure on that. Don't be so like, hey, 1 point guard equals 1 point guard. And I think that and this is the reason why Kyle Lowry has sort of been cast aside in this offense, is that he don't really need that sort of traditional point guard, because you've got Tyler and Jimmy and Bam, who are all capable playmakers. I'd rather have somebody who could bring a little bit more versatility to that starting lineup. So maybe it's Victor Oladipo, because we know he could get a bucket. He's great defensively. That shooting is starting to come around. I think he's shooting close to 40% over his last 8 or 9 games for the Miami Heat from 3-point range. So if that stuff really does come around, he might be, and defensively, you're not losing anything there with Vic. Right. So maybe that's an option.
I think Oladipo would be the better option to start, to be honest.
And then D'Lo kind of backfills him as the sixth man. I think that makes the most sense.
And then Gabe Vincent plays like the ostensible shooting guard position, which is something that he's natural. He's a shooting guard in a point guard type position. He'd be playing more off ball. Yes, he'd have the opportunity to create on occasion, but you'd have the ball in Russell's hands. And when he eventually gives up the rock, and he will from time to time, he'll give it up to Vincent, Max Strus, somebody along those lines.
D'Lo in a second unit with Gabe Vincent providing some secondary playmaking on weak side stuff. Strus spacing the floor, Orlando Robinson running pick and roll. And you and I have talked a lot, and you did a great job pointing this out, I think a couple weeks ago when Orlando was really starting to come along, how available he makes himself in pick and roll. D'Lo is a pick and roll point guard, period, end of story. He's nothing else other than that. I covered him when he was with the Golden State Warriors. They won it, famously, the Warriors don't run any pick and roll, so D'Angelo Russell had a hard time fitting in there. They traded him half a season in for Andrew Wiggins, right? But the Heat run a ton of pick and roll, right? And so in that respect, D'Angelo Russell does make a little bit of sense. And by the way, you can get to lineups where D'Angelo Russell does play alongside Tyler Herro and Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. If you really wanted to do that, Tyler Herro is a great he's Miami's best shooter. So you can, and we know that Miami wants him to do a little bit more catch and shoot stuff in certain alignments. So you could put D'Lo in there, have him just run some pick and roll with Bam. Maybe Jimmy Butler's not even in the game, and it's just like Tyler Herro and Caleb Martin or Highsmith or Strus or another floor spacer kind of guy. There's interesting things that you could do there to make the rest of like Tyler Herro's day a little bit easier and stuff like that. But
sure,
the problem with D'Lo, those are the pros, is that from a pick and roll standpoint, he fits in. Miami runs a ton of pick and roll. D'Lo runs a ton. And by the way, it's not that D'Lo doesn't. He's a volume shooter. He's actually a pretty good pick and roll ball handler. He's always been a relatively efficient pick and roll ball handler. It's that other weird stuff that you try to take out of his game. Defensively, there's big concerns. Temperament.
That's why you stagger lineups, right?
I mean, you would have to. Temperament, there's some concerns too. Is he going to buy into a 6-man role? Because I agree with you. I don't think you start him. So those are some, and then, whether or not you want to commit to him long-term when he becomes a free agent. But then again, maybe you don't want to commit to anything long-term and you're trying to create some cap flexibility, right? And by the way, if he walks away from this $30 million, if they don't re-sign him after he's making $30 million this year, they don't create a $30 million cap slot. They're still going to be, because of the extensions for Tyler Herro and Jimmy Butler kicking in, way over the cap. And there's really no real way to create any cap flexibility. But it does provide some space between where the Heat are now and the luxury tax, which, as we know, they're not making moves right now because they're so close to the luxury tax apron. So if you're able to create some space, then you start to open up some other trade possibilities, sign and trade kind of deals. You can always move D'Angelo Russell in a sign and trade and bring either a trade exception back or a player back, making whatever D'Lo ends up signing for, things like that. It just, end of the day, it creates more flexibility.
To your point about defense, look, I mean, I know it's a name that we've talked about on more than one occasion, but there is the constantly looming possibility of a Jay Crowder deal, right? And that seems less and less likely to get done. I just don't think that there's a realistic trade for Crowder at this point. The Suns can continue to save some salary basically by agreeing to a buyout. That seems like the most likely scenario. Let's assume then that Crowder chooses to come back to Miami where he played for half a season. If he gets inserted into the starting lineup, which also might be a rush in judgment as far as what happens with his role here, but let's just assume this for this particular episode.
Okay.
Excuse me? Yeah.
As a hypothetical.
Crowder gets started. Then Caleb Martin goes back to the bench. Now all of a sudden, those defensive concerns maybe aren't so great. You've got a stronger bench than perhaps with Victor Oladipo starting. You've got Tyler Herro starting, et cetera. The rest of the starting lineup, Jay Crowder now in place of Caleb Martin. Caleb Martin to the bench alongside Gabe Vincent, who's a pretty solid on-ball defender. Max Strus, who has his moments. It's not...
And you're still making the Lowry for D'Lo deal in addition to getting Jay Crowder on the buyout, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed.
All of a sudden... Yeah. You've transformed this team who had one of the weakest benches potentially into one of the better benches. You've got a balance of scoring, playmaking, pick and roll situations, defense, experience. That seems like a plus for Miami. It might be their best in-season possibility to improve this roster and still compete at a high level.
I'll throw one other alternative at you too, whether or not maybe they bring in Jay Crowder or they acquire another sort of power forward type of guy and you execute the Lowry for D'Angelo Russell deal. I think you can move Caleb Martin to the 2. He's a great floor spacer. He guards other guards all the time. It wouldn't be that much of a change in assignment for him. You could put Tyler Herro ostensibly at point guard, Caleb Martin at the 2, Jimmy Butler at the 3. Let's call it Jay Crowder at the 4, and then Bam at the 5. And then you still have D'Angelo Russell, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent coming off the bench, Oladipo still coming off the bench. I think there would be options, and Caleb Martin makes sense as a starter because he doesn't really need the ball to be effective. Right. He's a great floor spacer, catch and shoot guy, eager defender, all these things, which I think is sort of maybe if you have an issue with putting Oladipo back in the starting lineup does that usage drop to the point where he's not as valuable as he's been as a sixth man?
Right.
I think that this would create some options for Miami. D'Angelo Russell is also very available. Like, I mean, like not injured all the time, which is sort of the knock on Kyle Lowry right now. So that's been a positive for that. That could be a positive for bringing him in as well. He's also just a shot maker. Like the dude takes and makes shots. And when you look at Miami's offensive problems in the half court specifically, I don't know that D'Angelo Russell is the answer to Miami's ultimate half court offensive problems, but I think he can help marginally based on how low the bar is already this season. And so and then again, you can evaluate that fit when D'Lo becomes a free agent this offseason. So it's interesting. Really quick, give me 10 seconds on this. Would you be pro D'Angelo Russell? Or do you could skip this question altogether. I think we've covered the bases on this, but I don't know that
I also want to add that that there's some recent reporting from Darren Wolfson of The Athletic that they're not necessarily interested in Kyle Lowry. As much as we assume that he'd be a nice fit there in terms of leadership and things of that sort, there would have to be some additional salary, maybe even a sweetener. Would you be willing to include a Nikola Jovic in this kind of trade just for it to get done? That's the kind of sacrifice Miami would have to make in order to move Kyle Lowry's salary.
Mark Stein reported. Yeah, Mark Stein reporting the same thing too. I do wonder how much that is of Minnesota maybe posturing here, trying to get that sweetener that you're talking about. We'll see. It's a good point. There's other trades possibly on the table. Lakers, Clippers, Chicago. Could these teams be interested in Kyle Lowry? Also, another deal not involving Kyle Lowry, but involving the Utah Jazz for a popular name bandied about by Heat fans. We'll get to that next. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net, still your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. You're going to get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college basketball. We've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Reach Locked On Heat on Twitter, Instagram, email us, lockedonheat@gmail.com. All right, some other Kyle Lowry deals that I've come up with based on some of the reporting that's been out there, right? We've got Shams, Mark Stein, several people reporting that the Clippers could be interested in acquiring a point guard. The most common name mentioned in regards to the Clippers is Mike Conley. If a Mike Conley trade does not materialize for the Clippers, this is a team that has been looking for point guard help. They obviously added John Wall. He seems to be out of the rotation. Reggie Jackson's out of the rotation, or John Wall's out of the starting lineup. Reggie Jackson's out of the rotation. They've now elevated Terrence Mann to sort of their point guard spot, but they're sort of similar. Where
Wall is hurt.
Yeah, and then they've got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard that can do some ball handling and stuff like that. So, I think the Clippers make some sense for Kyle Lowry. The other thing too is that Kyle Lowry won a championship with Kawhi Leonard. I don't know how much there's a relationship there because I don't know how much of a relationship Kawhi has with any human on the planet. But there's at least a familiarity there, and I think if everything is going through Kawhi in terms of personnel decisions and stuff like that, he would probably sign off on bringing in Kyle Lowry, I would imagine, considering their past success. The other part of it, too, is that this is a team very much in win-now mode, and the Clippers have some chunky, interesting salaries, so much so that they are actually ripe for sort of a 2-for-1 kind of deal because they've got so many guys who might be out of the rotation making $8 to $12 million. So I think the Clippers make a lot of sense to make a trade if Mike Conley isn't gettable for them, or if the price is just too much for Mike Conley. What if the Heat offered Kyle Lowry for Robert Covington, who is playing backup center and backup power forward for them this year, plus either Norman Powell, who's on a 4-year contract worth 12 or 14 million or something like that, or Reggie Jackson, who's not as good a player as Norman Powell, but is in an expiring $12 million deals. So that provides some financial flexibility if the Heat would rather have that versus the better player, Norman Powell, or if Norman Powell is just not even on the board, because you could argue that Norman Powell is as good of a player as Kyle Lowry now. But for the Clippers, this would be more of a, hey, let's go get a player at a position of need versus Powell, who we've got some guys who kind of play that spot for us pretty well. Terrence Mann, Paul George, whatever. So Covington for Reggie Jackson and Norman Powell, is that enough to make you interested, David?
I think from Miami's perspective, the ability to get two players that can contribute as opposed to just one is certainly an option that they'd prefer. I just can't see it from the Clippers side of things.
Oh, really?
I don't think. I mean, do you think that Kyle Lowry is as good a player at this point now to warrant trading away a contributor like Reggie Jackson contributes? Norman Powell certainly contributes.
I think that would be the sticking
high-level starters. But.
The sticking point would be Norman Powell. You could make the argument that he's a better, more valuable player right now than Kyle Lowry, and I probably would. But so if you can't get,
are they trying to move his salary? Are they trying to free up?
I haven't heard that. He's actually really important to them. So maybe they're not. The other name would be like Luke Kennard, like these big chunky salaries. I think that if they offered Lowry for Covington and Jackson, I would have a hard time thinking the Clippers wouldn't make that deal unless they were just like really, really out on Kyle. Like Reggie Jackson doesn't play for them anymore. Like Robert Covington,
golf courses in Los Angeles. I mean, I know he'd be happy there.
Lowry would be way happier in Los Angeles than Minnesota. I think that's safe to say. Robert Covington would sort of fill that Jay Crowder role that Heat fans have been longing for all this entire time, and he's like kind of an in and out guy night to night for the Clippers, regardless of his availability and his health. If it meant, hey, we could trade a guy out of our rotation, Reggie Jackson plus Covington, I think that's maybe where Miami lands in this hypothetical trade negotiation. I think they would first ask for somebody like Kennard or Powell, and the Clippers could easily say no to that. But if it comes down to, I would do Powell and Covington in a heartbeat. And to your point, I don't know that the Clippers would. It depends on sort of how much they value. I think if they were to do it, they would be, okay, Powell's a good player, but he doesn't play.
Right? That's the starting point. That's how these negotiations work.
Exactly.
Pat Riley, front office, Andy Ellisberg, et cetera, says, you know what? We take Norm Powell off your hands.
Yeah.
You want to free up that salary. And they go, not so much. But we'll give you one lightly used Reggie Jackson. And then it'll be like, okay, maybe throw in a second rounder that won't convey or something.
Yeah, something like that. A second round pick. Covington, Reggie Jackson. At least it gives you the financial flexibility. Covington, I don't know if that I buy into him as a starting four in today's NBA, but
I don't think that's an option.
That would be more, I think, for financial flexibility. Covington's still under contract for next year at like about $12 million. So you would still be saving about $15-16 million on between.
I just don't know that necessarily addresses what Miami's looking for. Like, yes, certainly.
If you get Norman Powell, I think it would. But if you're getting Reggie
some
Jackson,
scoring punch, but that's a consistent scoring punch. But they're also looking at you have to upgrade at center. Like Orlando Robinson's been fine. We don't know what's going to happen with Omer.
I'm sorry, but Covington plays backup center now. Like he could sort of be like a Larry Nance type of guy.
Okay, that doesn't address Miami's issues in terms of rebounding and overall lack of size and things of that sort.
No,
So yeah,
it gives them different
I
look.
can see the point. Look, Miami loves versatility. Spoelstra loves versatility. You also need to get some kind of size in exchange too.
Let us know what you think about these trade ideas in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Here's the one with the Lakers. Not very original. It involves Russell Westbrook, as everything does. But Russell Westbrook for Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson. You're getting off of 2 long-term deals in Lowry and Robinson. You're bringing in Russell Westbrook. I think some teams that would potentially trade for Russell Westbrook would entertain maybe just buying out Westbrook altogether and just creating that cap flexibility going into this offseason. This would actually create quite a bit of financial flexibility for the Miami Heat. And I actually think they would hold on to Russell Westbrook and just sort of see what happens there. There's a lot to get into in terms of a Westbrook fit in Miami. And does he want to be the sixth man? What happens with Victor Oladipo? Does he go to the starting lineup? Where does Westbrook fit in? And all this stuff. But just, we don't have to do all of it, but just like a quick elevator pitch on why you're in or out on Westbrook for Lowry and Robinson.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as much as it's been difficult to try and get Kyle Lowry from a media perspective, Russell Westbrook would be even more difficult. And also, I don't think he's going to buy into the 6-man role here. I think Darvin Ham, by virtue of being a former player and this being, a LeBron led team.
Yeah, it's LeBron mostly.
I think he would buy in.
Yeah.
He's going to come to Miami and be like, who the hell is Eric Spoelstra, despite the championship success and everything else. And maybe that's not the right attitude, or certainly it's not the right attitude, but I still think it would be Westbrook's attitude.
What if you started Westbrook?
Oh, yeah, I guess that's an option. Sorry, can't keep a straight face. It is a possibility. I just don't think that's one that you want to entertain.
Let's move on to the next one. I don't really have a trade here, but I have a destination and some pieces that could come back. No, the Chicago Bulls.
Oh, right. Okay.
Kyle Lowry to Chicago, reunites with DeMar DeRozan. Great story. A lot of reporting today about what the Bulls are kind of looking to do here. They're putting Kobe White on the table. I think Lonzo Ball is on the table, although I don't think that really moves the needle for Miami considering Lonzo's injury right now. Kobe White, you could put some other sort of pieces in there. I threw out things like that. I threw out the Vucevic idea a couple weeks ago. He's played so well now for Chicago that the reporting around that now is that they're probably not going to move any of their big three. If anything, they're going to be buyers, but they need a point guard, right? Ayuz Dosunmu has been really nice for them, but I still think ultimately they want him as a backup point guard, not their starting point guard. So can you throw some salaries together here for Chicago, bring in some young guys if you're the Miami Heat? I don't know. It's just an option in terms of a landing spot, but I don't have any specific deal sort of framework in place that we need to debate it all that much. But
Jovic, Dedmon, Lowry in exchange for Dragic, Vucevic, and something. I can't imagine what it would be. Maybe
I just don't think they're going to trade Vucevic at this point because
you get a young starting caliber passing European player in Jovic.
Well, he's not starting caliber now. And the Bulls are winning now. Right
long term, yeah. Well, I mean, this is building up depth for the future, which Chicago has not done a very good job of.
What if it was right?
The GM there.
What if it was they have Caruso? Caruso feels like a guy that makes sense for Miami.
Yeah, I mean, he's your best defender. I think Caruso would be he's got heat. I hate to say it because the sting of the Lakers win in the finals a couple of years ago still exists, but he is the kind of guy that Heat fans would love.
Yeah, it's just even if you put him and Kobe White together, that's still only $16.5 million. You're not getting close.
Patrick Williams, they've gotten disillusioned with, and while he's still young and he has a potential there, he's another guy that's a long-term project because he's still raw. He's a Florida State guy.
If you could get Patrick Williams in the deal, you pull that deal right now. If you're the Heat, you get Patrick Williams, Kobe White, and Caruso. That's a no-brainer for Miami. I just think if the Bulls do ultimately move off of Patrick Williams, I think they can get more than Kyle Lowry, but maybe not. I don't know. But that would be sort of something there. I wouldn't mind if the Heat at least put in a phone call. Final trade here, not involving Kyle Lowry anymore, but this is based on a Bobby Marks idea in his column that he put out on Monday on ESPN.com involving the Heat and the Utah Jazz. The Heat send Dwayne Dedmon a lottery-protected first for this summer that, if it doesn't convey in the lottery, turns into 2 future second-rounders for Jared Vanderbilt. What do you think?
Makes sense. It just makes sense. One, you unload Dedmon. You hate giving up the potential picks.
But if it
I
conveys
still
in 2
think
seconds, I don't care.
Yeah, well, Miami struck gold with those seconds too. Like, I know they trade them away like nothing, but they've also been able to make good choices with those.
Sure.
Or look, but you know
But
what?
I like
But
Jared
there's
Vanderbilt.
not
It's a
much
good young
separation
player.
between a second round pick. There's not much separation between a second round pick and what Miami does in terms of undrafted players. I think
exactly.
That line is blurring more and more. So you know what? Yeah, pull the trigger.
I would do that in a heartbeat. If I'm Utah, can I get a little bit more for Vanderbilt? I don't know. I have no idea what the price. Everybody on NBA Twitter loves Jared Vanderbilt. I actually have no idea what his price tag would be if you're asking an NBA front office guy to actually trade for him. It probably would be like you're not trading an unprotected first for Vanderbilt. So then you start talking about what your protections would be. Lottery protected feels about right in terms of a Jared Vanderbilt return. And if that conveys into 2 seconds, if that protected first does not convey, that makes sense to me in terms of a price. And then in terms of Utah, if you're just looking for matching salary, right? Deadman is easily, you just get off that salary easily. So you're not, if you're the Jazz, you're not taking on unwanted salary in terms of Dwayne Dedmon. So you're getting something nice there.
But it would convey, right? Theoretically, because Miami will avoid the lottery if they get into the playoffs.
Right. So if they get into the playoffs, which would be the idea here, and I think the Heat are still going to make the playoffs, then yeah, so that would just be you'd be trading first round pick. You'd be trading 2 second-round picks for Jared Vanderbilt.
No, if it's lottery protected, if they fall into the lottery,
no, it's lottery protected. So if it falls into the lottery, the Jazz get it.
Right.
But if it falls out of the lottery, it turns into 2 second-rounders. Okay, I'm sorry.
Wait. I thought it's the other way around. If it falls, if for whatever reason the Heat don't miss the playoffs and they fall into the lottery,
right?
Then they wouldn't convey.
You're right. You're right.
They'll make the playoffs and they'll basically be giving up an 18th, 19th, 20th pick in the draft, whatever it would be.
Yeah, that seems like about the right asking price for Jared
Dedmon and the 20th pick in the first round for Jared Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt's what? Fair. How old is he? He's 23. He'll be 24. Oh. He'll be 24 in 100 days. Yeah, I mean, the 20th pick in the first round. The Heat have had success at the end of the first round, but if you're looking for an immediate it really depends on what you think about Jared Vanderbilt. Is he a long-term fit as a starter? You know, because in the first round, you're looking to draft a potential starter. And so if you're going to give up a first-round pick, Vanderbilt at 23 going on 24, that corner three has come along. He's taken about 1 3-pointer a game. 40% of his 3-point attempts come from the corner. Would that be more in Miami? I would imagine probably he's hitting like 36%, 37% from the corners. So not great, but trending in the right direction for a young guy. Super active, unbelievable rebounder. For as many shots as Miami misses, he would have offensive rebound opportunities for days in Miami. So that would be helpful. I like the Vanderbilt pick. All right. That'll do it for us today. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. Now make your second listen game-to-game NBA, every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. David, thanks for joining me.
You got it, Wes.